Hello, Pisces. Welcome back to Henry Sacred Tarot. I hope you're doing well. So Pisces, this is a general reading, which means some parts may resonate deeply and some parts may not, and that's perfectly okay. Trust your own intuition above everything else. Now, as I connect with your energy, I have to be honest, it feels like someone is finally reaching a point where they can no longer ignore what they feel. The silence they've been holding on to feels heavier than before. The distance doesn't feel as comfortable as it once did. And the more they try to move forward, the more something keeps pulling their thoughts back toward you. So let's see where this energy wants to take us. Okay, Pisces. The first thing I'm noticing is that someone is looking at you very differently than they used to. And honestly, I don't think they expected this to happen. I feel like there was a time when they thought they understood you. They thought they had you figured out. Maybe they placed you in a box. Maybe they assumed they knew exactly who you were, what you wanted, or how you felt. But something has shifted. Something inside of them is waking up. As I sit with this energy, the Judgment card keeps coming forward, and it feels less like a sudden realization and more like a slow awakening. You know, the kind that sneaks up on a person, the kind that starts with one memory, then another, until eventually they can't stop thinking about it. Because what they're remembering isn't just a moment. They're remembering how you made them feel. They're remembering your kindness, the way you listened, the way you tried to understand them, even when they struggled to understand themselves. And honestly, Pisces, I think that's what is hitting this person the hardest. Not what you said, not what you did, but who you were. Because sometimes people don't fully recognize the value of a gentle heart until they find themselves surrounded by people who aren't gentle at all. And I keep feeling that. It's like they're comparing experiences without even realizing they're doing it. They're meeting new people, talking to different people, living their life. And somehow your energy keeps standing out in the background, almost like a song they forgot they loved. The Six of Cups card keeps showing up around this energy, and with it comes this feeling of nostalgia. Not forced nostalgia, not someone trying to relive the past, more like memories arriving on their own. A random thought while driving, a familiar place, a certain song, a smell, a conversation that reminds them of you, and suddenly they're right back there again, thinking about something they thought they had already moved past. You know what feels interesting? I don't think they're only remembering the good times. I think they're remembering the moments they didn't appreciate enough, the moments they took for granted, the moments where your presence felt so natural that they assumed it would always be there. And now they're starting to see those moments differently. Now they're looking back with new eyes. And that's where things become emotional, because the Five of Cups card is sitting here. And honestly, this feels like regret, not dramatic regret. Not somebody sitting in a dark room crying all day. It's quieter than that. It's the kind of regret that follows a person around. The kind that shows up when they're trying to fall asleep. The kind that whispers, what if I had done things differently? What if I had been more honest? What if I had recognized what was right in front of me? I keep hearing that question. What if? Because the truth is, Pisces, this person is beginning to understand that what they felt around you wasn't ordinary. There was something comforting about your energy, something safe, something healing, and I don't think they fully understood that at the time. The Moon card is creating such a strong atmosphere here, because there are still feelings they haven't fully admitted to themselves. There are still emotions moving beneath the surface. They're trying to make sense of everything, trying to understand why your presence continues to linger in their mind, why your memory keeps returning when they least expect it, why they still feel connected to moments that should have faded by now. And honestly, the more they question it, the stronger it seems to become. It's almost like every answer leads to another question. Every memory opens another door. Every realization leads to another realization. And I feel this person sitting with something they haven't wanted to face for a long time. The possibility that they may have underestimated you. The possibility that they didn't truly see you when they had the chance. Because what keeps standing out to me is your heart, your sincerity, your willingness to care. Not because you wanted something in return, but because that's simply who you are. And for someone who may have spent a long time focusing on other things, success, control, distractions, responsibilities, expectations, that kind of authenticity becomes impossible to forget. I have to be real with you. The energy here feels very reflective, very personal, very quiet. Like somebody is sitting alone with their thoughts and finally allowing themselves to feel something they kept pushing away. And the more they sit with those feelings, the harder it becomes to pretend they aren't there. Because every road they take somehow circles back to the same place. Every thought seems to lead back to the same person. And that person is you. But what feels even more important is that this realization doesn't seem finished yet. It feels like it's still unfolding, like they're only beginning to understand the depth of what they're feeling. And as those emotions continue to rise to the surface, something else begins to change inside of them. Because what I'm picking up here feels less like somebody finding answers and more like somebody running out of places to hide from their own heart. You know, Pisces, there are moments in life when we can distract ourselves. We can stay busy. We can throw ourselves into work. We can fill every quiet space with noise. But eventually, the things we refuse to feel start finding their way back to us. And honestly, that's exactly what this energy feels like. The Death card is sitting here, and I have to be real with you. Somebody is changing. Not in a loud way. Not in a dramatic way where they wake up one morning and become a completely different person. This feels slower, deeper, almost uncomfortable. Like they're shedding an old version of themselves piece by piece. The version that kept everything under control. The version that convinced themselves they were fine. The version that kept saying, I'm over it. Because the truth is, I don't think they were ever as over it as they wanted to believe. Something keeps breaking through the walls they've built. And every time it does, another memory rises to the surface. Another feeling, another realization, another moment connected to you. The Moon card is still hanging around this reading, Pisces. And it feels like there are emotions moving underneath everything this person does. They may smile. They may laugh. They may go about their day normally. People around them might assume everything is okay. But inside there is a conversation happening that nobody else can hear. A conversation they've been avoiding for a very long time. Because what they're beginning to understand is that certain feelings disappear just because they were ignored. Some feelings wait, quietly, patiently, until we're finally ready to look at them. And this person is reaching that point. You know what keeps standing out? I don't feel like they're fighting you. I feel like they're fighting themselves. They're fighting what they know. They're fighting what they feel. They're fighting the part of them that already understands the truth. Because once they admit it, they can't go back to pretending. Once they acknowledge it, everything changes. And that brings me to the Tower card. Okay, this energy feels powerful, because I don't think the disruption they're experiencing is coming from the outside. I think it's happening inside their own mind. Something they believed. Something they told themselves. Something they used to justify their choices. It isn't holding up anymore. And that's creating pressure. You know when you've been telling yourself a story for so long that it starts feeling true, and then one day you see something differently. One tiny shift, one tiny realization, and suddenly the whole story begins to crack. That's what this feels like. They're questioning things they never questioned before. Looking back at situations they thought they understood. Seeing details they missed. Understanding conversations differently. Replaying moments they dismissed. And every time they revisit those memories, another layer falls away. Honestly, I think this person is surprised by their own emotions, because I don't get the feeling that they expected you to still affect them this deeply. They thought enough time had passed. They thought enough distance had passed. They thought life would naturally move everything along. Yet here they are, still thinking, still feeling, still carrying something unfinished. The Eight of Cups card is creating such an interesting atmosphere around all of this, because it feels like somebody spent a long time trying to walk away emotionally. Trying to convince themselves that leaving something behind was the same as releasing it. But those are two different things. And that's what they're discovering. You can leave a place. You can leave a conversation. You can leave a relationship. You can leave a chapter of your life. But your heart doesn't always leave at the same speed. Sometimes it lingers. Sometimes it circles back. Sometimes it waits until years later to tell you what it couldn't admit at the time. And that's exactly where this energy feels like it is. A delayed emotional truth, one that's becoming harder and harder to silence. I keep seeing this person in quiet moments. Not during the busy parts of the day. Not when they're surrounded by people. I'm talking about those small moments nobody talks about. The drive home. The empty room. The few minutes before sleep. The moment they wake up before their mind gets busy. Those are the moments when your energy seems to find them. And what's interesting is that I don't feel panic here. I feel vulnerability. I feel somebody slowly lowering their defenses, somebody realizing they don't have all the answers, somebody realizing that strength isn't always about suppressing emotions. Sometimes strength is being willing to face them. You know, there is a softness developing in this person's energy, a softness that wasn't there before, and I don't think they fully understand what's happening yet. They're still in the middle of it, still processing it, still moving through it. But something important is taking place. because every layer they're shedding brings them closer to their authentic feelings. Every illusion that falls away leaves them standing a little closer to the truth, and the truth seems to have your name written all over it. Not because they're forcing it, not because they're trying to create something that isn't there, but because every road they've taken to avoid these feelings somehow keeps leading back to the same place, back to the same connection, back to the same questions, back to the same person. And the more honest they become with themselves, the harder it becomes to ignore what their heart has been trying to say all along. Because what starts as a feeling eventually becomes a presence. And Pisces, your presence feels very alive in this person's world right now. Not necessarily because you're physically around them, not because you're constantly speaking to them, not because you're trying to get their attention. It's almost the opposite. The quieter you are, the more they seem to notice you. The Star card is coming through with such a calm but powerful energy. And honestly, I keep getting this image of someone looking towards something they can't quite stop looking at. Not obsessively, not in an unhealthy way. More like someone who keeps finding their eyes drifting in the same direction. You know when a person leaves an impression that doesn't fade? Not because they were the loudest person in the room, not because they demanded attention, but because something about their spirit felt genuine. That's what this feels like. Because I don't think this person misses drama. I don't think they miss confusion. I think they miss how they felt around you. And there is a difference. They miss feeling understood without having to explain every part of themselves. They miss feeling accepted without having to perform. They miss feeling seen. And honestly, that's becoming harder for them to ignore. The High Priestess is sitting quietly in this reading, and every time I look at her, I feel this strange sense of knowing. Like there are things this person never said out loud, things they never fully shared, yet somehow they always felt like you understood anyway. Have you ever met someone who seemed to hear the words you didn't say? Someone who could read the energy behind the conversation? That's the feeling I keep getting. And I think it caught this person off guard. Because many people go through life protecting certain parts of themselves, keeping things hidden, keeping things private. Yet around you, Pisces, something felt different. There was less effort involved, less pretending, less pressure. And the funny thing is, I don't think they fully appreciated that at the time. You know, sometimes we only recognize peace after we've spent enough time surrounded by noise, and that's what keeps coming through. This person keeps comparing experiences. Not intentionally, it just happens. They meet people. They have conversations. They move through life. And little moments keep reminding them of what felt unique about you. The way you listened. The way you paid attention. The way you could sit with someone else's emotions without trying to control them. And honestly, that's rare. The Page of Swords keeps appearing around this energy. Okay, I have to be real with you. This person is curious. Very curious. And I don't mean that in a dramatic way. I mean, they wonder about you. They wonder what you're doing. They wonder what your life looks like now. They wonder if you've changed. They wonder what you've been learning, what you've been feeling, who you've become. For some of you, this could simply be somebody checking in from a distance, looking at a social media profile, revisiting an old conversation, remembering something you once said. For others, it feels even more subtle than that, like they don't necessarily need information about you. They just keep thinking about you, because every unanswered question seems to lead back to another question. And the more they think, the more they realize how much they still don't know. What really stands out here is the Queen of Cups. And Pisces, this energy feels deeply connected to how they see you. Not as somebody perfect, not as somebody who never made mistakes, but as somebody whose heart always felt genuine, somebody who cared, somebody who gave more understanding than most people realize. I keep feeling this person remembering small things, tiny moments, moments that probably seemed insignificant at the time. A conversation, a smile, a look, a gesture. The way you reacted when they were struggling, the way you showed compassion when they didn't necessarily deserve it. Those memories are becoming more meaningful now. And honestly, that's what happens sometimes. Life gives us distance, and distance creates perspective. Suddenly, the things that once seemed ordinary don't feel ordinary anymore. They feel valuable. I also keep getting the feeling that this person is learning something important about themselves through all of this. Because every thought about you seems to reveal something they weren't ready to see before. Maybe it's their emotional habits. Maybe it's their fears. Maybe it's the way they protected themselves. Maybe it's the way they convinced themselves they didn't need certain things. Whatever it is, your memory seems to be acting like a mirror. And every time they look into that mirror, they discover another layer of truth. It's interesting because I don't feel urgency here. I don't feel somebody rushing. I don't feel somebody trying to force anything. What I feel is attention, steady attention. Like your energy has become something they keep returning to. Almost like a favorite book sitting on a shelf. They may not pick it up every day, but they always know it's there. And when life becomes complicated, somehow their thoughts drift back toward it, toward you, toward what they experienced with you, toward what they never fully understood while they were living it. And Pisces, I think part of them is beginning to realize that this connection affected them much more deeply than they originally believed. Not because of one big moment, not because of one dramatic event, but because of hundreds of small moments that quietly stayed with them. Moments that never really left. Moments that continued growing in meaning long after they happened. And as those realizations continue to settle into their heart, another question begins to surface. A question they may not be able to avoid much longer. What would happen if they finally said everything they've been keeping inside? Because once a question reaches the heart, it rarely stays quiet forever. And Pisces, this person feels like they're standing in front of a conversation they've been postponing for much longer than they expected. Not because they don't know what they want to say. Honestly, I think they know exactly what they want to say. The challenge is allowing themselves to say it. Allowing themselves to be vulnerable enough to let those words leave their mouth. Because words have consequences. Once something is spoken, it becomes real. And I keep feeling that hesitation. Not avoidance, not denial, just hesitation. Like someone standing outside a door with their hand hovering above the handle. They know they want to walk through it. They just haven't gathered the courage yet. The Knight of Cups is moving through this reading in such a gentle way. And what stands out to me is the sincerity. You know, some people speak because they're lonely. Some people speak because they want attention. Some people speak because they want reassurance. This feels different. This feels like somebody who has been carrying something for so long that it has started to feel heavier than silence itself. And that's an interesting place to be. Because there comes a point where keeping everything inside becomes harder than simply telling the truth. I keep hearing unfinished sentences, things they wish they had said, things they wish they had explained, moments where they should have opened up but didn't. And the strange thing is, Pisces, I don't feel like they expect perfection. I don't feel like they're imagining some flawless outcome. What I feel is a desire to finally be honest, to finally let you see a side of them that has remained hidden. Because for a long time, they may have convinced themselves that staying silent was easier, safer, less complicated. But silence has a way of creating its own complications. Sometimes misunderstandings grow in the spaces where conversations never happened. Sometimes distance forms not because two people stopped caring, but because neither person knew how to bridge the gap. And that realization feels important here. Temperance keeps appearing like a quiet presence in the background, not rushing, not pushing, just reminding this person that some things take time to understand. I think they've been trying to make sense of their emotions, trying to separate fear from truth, trying to understand whether what they're feeling is temporary or something deeper. And the more time passes, the more consistent those feelings seem to become. That's what keeps surprising them, because they expected certain emotions to fade. They expected certain thoughts to disappear, yet somehow they remain, still there, still waiting, still asking to be acknowledged. I have to be real with you. This person feels more reflective than impulsive. They're not rushing into anything. In fact, I think they've spent a lot of time observing themselves lately, looking at old choices, looking at old reactions, looking at moments where fear made decisions that the heart didn't agree with. And that's not always easy. Self-awareness can be uncomfortable, because once you start seeing yourself clearly, you also start seeing the moments when you could have done better, the moments when you could have been braver, kinder, more honest. And I feel this person sitting with that awareness, not punishing themselves, just finally seeing things differently. The Three of Wands creates such a thoughtful atmosphere around all of this, because I keep getting the feeling that they're imagining possibilities, not fantasies, not unrealistic dreams, possibilities. They're looking ahead and wondering what might happen if they stopped letting fear make every decision. They're wondering what life looks like when honesty enters the picture. They're wondering what changes when two people finally say what they've been holding back. And honestly, those questions seem to be growing louder. I also feel this person becoming increasingly aware of how much energy they've spent avoiding a conversation that continues living inside them anyway. Think about that for a second. Imagine carrying a thought every day, trying to push it aside, trying to ignore it, trying to distract yourself from it, only to realize it's still there every morning, still there every evening, still there in the quiet moments. Eventually, you stop asking how to get rid of it. You start asking why it's still there, and that shift feels significant because they're no longer trying to escape the feeling. They're trying to understand it. The Ace of Swords feels like a breath of fresh air moving through all this emotional energy. Not because everything suddenly becomes simple, but because clarity is beginning to emerge. Little by little, piece by piece, a truth they've been circling around is becoming harder to deny. And what's fascinating is that the truth doesn't feel complicated. The fear feels complicated. The truth feels simple. Sometimes the simplest truths are the ones we avoid the longest because they require us to be vulnerable, because they require us to admit what matters, because they require us to risk being seen. And I think that's where this person finds themselves, standing between silence and honesty, standing between uncertainty and expression, standing between what they've kept hidden and what they may eventually need to share. You know, when I look at this energy, I don't see somebody trying to rewrite the past. I see somebody trying to understand it, trying to understand themselves, trying to understand why certain feelings never disappeared, why certain memories stayed alive, why certain connections continued echoing through their life long after they thought the chapter was over. And as those answers slowly begin to surface, it feels like another realization is waiting just beyond the horizon. A realization not only about what they feel, but about what they may genuinely want to do about it. Because eventually a person stops asking themselves why they feel something and starts asking what that feeling is asking them to do. And Pisces, that's where the energy seems to be moving. Not toward fantasy, not toward nostalgia, not toward replaying old memories over and over again. This feels more grounded than that, more mature, more intentional. Almost like somebody has reached a point where they understand that feelings alone aren't enough. Feelings matter. But what you do with those feelings matters too. And that's why the Two of Cups feels so significant here. Because when I sit with this energy, I don't see somebody lost in their own emotions anymore. I see somebody beginning to understand the value of connection, real connection. The kind that asks two people to meet each other honestly. The kind that requires presence. The kind that requires effort. You know, there is a difference between missing someone and appreciating someone. And I think this person is learning that difference. Missing someone can happen because they're gone. Appreciating someone happens when you finally understand what they brought into your life. And honestly, Pisces, that understanding seems to be growing stronger, not weaker, because the more they reflect on everything, the more they recognize how rare it felt to be around someone who made them feel emotionally safe. I keep hearing this phrase. I didn't realize it at the time, and that feels important, because sometimes life moves fast, people move fast, decisions happen quickly. Fear gets involved, pride gets involved, assumptions get involved, and before you know it, a meaningful connection becomes something you're looking at through the rearview mirror. But what happens when you realize the view behind you still matters? What happens when you realize there was more depth there than you originally understood? That's the question this person seems to be wrestling with. The Ace of Cups is bringing in such a gentle energy, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just sincere. And sincerity is something I keep coming back to throughout this entire reading. Because what I feel here isn't somebody trying to impress you. It's not somebody trying to say the perfect thing. It's not somebody trying to create a grand performance. Honestly, I think they're tired of pretending they don't care. Tired of carrying conversations in their head that never happen in real life. Tired of wondering. Tired of questioning. Tired of holding back. And there comes a point where emotional honesty begins to feel lighter than emotional avoidance. That's what keeps standing out. Because I think this person is starting to understand that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's clarity. It's truth. It's showing up without hiding behind a mask. I have to be real with you. There is something very heartfelt about this energy. And it doesn't feel rushed. It feels considered. Like somebody who has spent a long time learning something about themselves. The Lovers keeps appearing here, and every time it does, I feel the importance of choice. Not a choice made from pressure. Not a choice made from loneliness, a conscious choice. A choice to stop running from what feels meaningful. A choice to stop letting fear speak louder than the heart. Because fear is often very convincing. Fear can create 1,000 reasons not to do something, 1,000 reasons not to speak, 1,000 reasons not to take a chance. But eventually a person has to ask themselves a simple question. Will I regret staying silent more than I regret being honest? And I think that's a question this person has been sitting with. Not for a day, not for a week. For a while, long enough that the answer is beginning to become clearer. What fascinates me is that this energy doesn't feel focused on fixing the past. It feels focused on approaching the future differently. And that's an important distinction, because nobody can rewrite old chapters. Nobody can go back and change every misunderstanding. Nobody can erase every missed opportunity. But people can choose how they move forward. People can choose how they show up. People can choose how honest they're willing to be. And that willingness feels stronger than it used to. The Hierophant creates such a steady presence here, a grounded presence. Because I think this person is starting to see relationships differently than they once did. They're thinking less about excitement and more about substance, less about appearances and more about emotional truth, less about temporary feelings and more about what actually lasts. And Pisces, when they think about what has lasted, your energy keeps appearing. Not because you've demanded attention, not because you've forced your way into their thoughts, but because something about your presence remained meaningful even after time passed, even after distance passed, even after life continued moving forward. That says something. And I think they're beginning to understand exactly what it says. You know, sometimes the heart leads us back toward places we thought we had already left behind. Not because we're meant to repeat old patterns, but because there's still something there worth understanding, worth acknowledging, worth honoring. And as I sit with this final energy, I don't see somebody chasing a memory anymore. I see somebody recognizing the difference between what felt temporary and what felt real. I see somebody becoming more honest with themselves, more honest about what matters, more honest about who matters, and perhaps most importantly, more honest about the fact that some connections continue living in the heart for a reason that can't be explained away by logic alone. Okay, Pisces, that's where I'm going to leave this reading. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. As always, take what resonates and leave what doesn't. Trust your own intuition above everything else. And until next time, take gentle care of yourself. Bye for now.